Welcome, everyone, to Mytality. I was reading recently about an article that said that over 6 million people in the United States and Canada have some form of dementia and Alzheimer's. My guest today is Sharon McGee, whose husband, Arthur, has a form of dementia. And if you think this podcast is going to be something that is just relates to the elderly, I think Sharon and I are going to give you a perspective that will change your mind on that. And in fact, some symptoms can occur in people as early as in their 50s, 40s, and even their 30s. Thank you so much for being on the show, Sharon. I really appreciate it. It's such an important topic.
Well, thank you for having me, Gary.
Yeah, absolutely. And first of all, I just want to say I am so sorry that you are going through this. You, your family, as well as Arthur is going through this because it is really a devastating disease. And the more I read about it, the more I realized how devastating this disease is and can be.
It is. And not only the patient themselves, but it really an impact on the family members as well. So,
Sure. Mm-hmm. And it's for so long.
Yes.
It is not a quick disease. They say this is the long goodbye. I mean, that's how it is. I've entitled your podcast, your episode, as Here But Not. Yeah. But many people refer to it as the long goodbye because it is many years.
Yes, many years. And it depends. Some people it's shorter, others are longer. So there isn't a measuring stick to say how long it's going to be. But just
correct. But tell me about Arthur. I do remember Arthur. He is a big man in stature, but also his personality. And he could be intimidating, but yet he was about as gentle as a lamb also and things. So tell us a little bit about Arthur and your family, too.
So Arthur is 68. He's tall. He's 6'6". And played basketball in high school and college, and really big on family. So next month will be our 39th wedding anniversary.
Oh, sweet.
And so we have 3 adult children, 2 girls and a boy on the end. And so range from 38 to 28 in age. And
was he born in New Orleans?
Arthur was born in New Orleans.
And was raised and lived his life here?
Yes. Mm-hmm. West Banker.
But you're not. You're from Opelousas.
I'm originally from Opelousas.
Which is the central part of the state.
Yes. And so moved here out of college and met him, and rest is history.
So how you have 3 wonderful kids, and I know that they've been very supportive to you, and that I was just wondering about how this has impacted them.
It has been difficult for them, especially the girls, because they were both, daddy's girls. And so just adjusting to that and seeing him deteriorate where, big, strong dad that did everything and took care of everything. And to see him like this, it's heartbreaking.
It is heartbreaking. Yeah. I can imagine. I can imagine. So how and when was Arthur diagnosed? Because I remember a time when you would go, and at first I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it was almost like wondering if you had some heart issues and if maybe arteriosclerosis was some of the problems, but eventually it did not. So how and when did this?
Right. What I always say, diagnosis is just a point in time, and that the disease actually starts years in advance. So in 2012, we really noticed a significant change in his behavior and mannerisms and, things he stopped doing around the house. And so I talked to his primary care physician, and he did have a history of hypertension and congestive heart failure. And so I talked to the physician and said, I don't know, he's got this change in behavior. He's having issues with memory. I don't know what this is. Is it, TIAs from the hypertension? Is it depression? Is it midlife crisis? Is it, he's just sick of his wife? But so they did some initial testing in neurology, and it's sort of borderline. It wasn't really anything definitive identified. And so they said, have him come back in 6 months with his wife. And so at the time, his primary care physician mentioned dementia, but that was the furthest thing from my mind.
Sure.
And so, because there's some nutritional deficiencies that can cause dementia, And so B12 deficiency is one of them. So that was one of the things.
So in 2012, about how old was Arthur?
He was 57.
57. Yeah. You know what? That's probably one of the first misconceptions that I have is 57 is not an age where I always saw that dementia would occur. And I'm sure it was very hard to believe at the very beginning to even hear that it could be.
Absolutely. And so here at the time in 2013 where we got the definitive diagnosis, and our youngest was finishing high school, going off to college. And so after, making sacrifices and growing kids, and now was our time to enjoy and be empty nesters, and, life had something else in store.
And then I have something else in store. Absolutely. What kind of dementia does he have?
So he has what's called frontotemporal dementia, and so it affects the frontal lobe and the temporal lobe of the brain.
I've read, the only reason why I know about that is because wasn't Bruce Willis recently diagnosed with that same type of a thing?
Exactly.
And have you been following like Bruce Willis, and has his progression of the disease kind of followed what Arthur has gone through?
Similar. There's two main types of it's called FTD, frontotemporal dementia, and one is behavioral, and one is aphasia, where it affects speech first.
Okay.
And so with Bruce Willis, he was initially diagnosed with progressive aphasia, and so he lost his ability with language. But I was recently reading an article about him, and it is very similar in the transition, the progression of the disease.
So there's different kinds of dementia. Then just saying dementia doesn't really.
But dementia is the umbrella term for several conditions that have several symptoms. So it's where you have neurological deficiencies, cognitive deficiencies that affect your everyday life. So where you can't do normal things you would normally do daily. And so under that umbrella of dementia, there are different types. So Alzheimer's is the most common that we hear the most about. FTD affects more younger individuals. It's one of the harder to diagnose because it actually is, misdiagnosed for other things.
Sure.
And again, because it affects folks so much younger. There's Lewy body dementia. There's vascular. So that's some of the more common.
And please forgive me, but the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's, because we're very familiar, many of us are familiar with Alzheimer's, but I have to plead ignorance to know that what it really is versus dementia.
So Alzheimer's is just a type of dementia.
Oh, is it?
So
Okay.
again, dementia is a term that's this umbrella for a number of different conditions that fall under that.
Well, I have to tell you, like I said, I've been reading, but the more I read, the more I've had some misconceptions about all the diseases and things, and I'm sure it frustrates you. I just know your personality. In some ways, it's frustrating to know that other people are not as familiar either with dementia. And so when you mention that, I'm sure some people come back and they're trying to be helpful, but they're not because they don't really understand. What are some of the misconceptions?
Well, you're right. Anytime you say the word dementia, people automatically associate Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
And somebody asked me recently, well, how long has he had Alzheimer's? I said, he doesn't have Alzheimer's. And sometimes I just let it go.
Right.
But also there are people in healthcare professionals that don't understand the differences. And also when you say the term dementia, it doesn't necessarily identify what stage they are.
Oh.
And so impacting how do you manage, again, in the healthcare setting, someone that has dementia. If they're in the earlier stages, they have more cognitive ability, can understand more, versus as it progresses, they can't.
How many stages are there?
Generally, it's classified into 3 stages: early, mid, and late stage. Other resources may go into more detail, but generally, it's broken up into early, mid, and late.
If I may ask, is Arthur in the latter?
He's in the latter stage.
Okay.
Yes.
We were talking just before the show started that he has been in hospice.
Yes.
And when I heard that he was in hospice, I told you that I was waiting any day now to receive a phone call that he had passed. Mm-hmm. And that is a huge misconception
It is.
about even being in hospice and things. And so I was wondering if you could talk about that, because I'm sure many of the listeners are.
So the hospice is a service, whereas the expectation is that the patient will expire within 6 months. It's not a hard and fast rule. The person can extend, a year, longer, as long as they are, the condition is progressing, they are digressing, they continue under hospice care. So yeah, that is a huge misconception that people think, oh, when they're on hospice, they're going to be gone in a week.
So I know when a grandmother was on hospice, we didn't give her any, in the last days, she didn't receive medicine or she didn't receive nutrition and water or anything because of that. But that sounds like that is totally not Arthur.
Correct. And as for what I've learned, different hospices have different philosophies on what they will allow the individual to have and get. And so one of the things when he was enrolled with this particular hospice that we have, they reviewed with me what his medical conditions were, what medications he was on, and which ones I wanted him to continue with, versus a different hospice I talked to just doing my initial evaluation said, well, what meds can he stay on? I said, well, we have to talk and see and make a determination. It's like, okay. And this one was much different. So,
many people know, the listeners know that I have stage 4 bladder cancer. And in that, the various providers that I had to deal with, and in many cases, I had to deal with coordinating care and getting the right care or seeing what was wrong with me. And that is about this, and anyway, it was overwhelming sometimes. I'll just have to tell you, and frustrating to boot. Is it the same almost with like
it is
dementia?
The same. And just, I guess, with any illness, coordinating care among providers. So, I mean, if you're in one health system, that helps. But he had providers that were outside, so he had home health coming in and providing care. Their records were in their system. He had a decubitus also, so he had wound care, and they were coming from a different company. And so I was in the middle of trying to play air traffic controller and getting records from each of these providers to upload into his patient portal so that his primary care physician and other specialists that were seeing him could keep up with what was going on. So you would think in 2023 with electronic health records, we wouldn't still have to deal with that, but it's still a very real.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Issue.
So he had home health care for a period of time. Were you still working at the time?
Yes.
And that made it really very important to have that service.
Well, but the home health was just very specialized care that was coming in. So that's different from sitters who come and stay with a special person with dementia. Because typically you get to a point where you can't leave them at home alone. And so that's another distinction to understand the difference between sitters or aides that you have come to care for them versus home health is really very specialized. And they just, come in for a short period of time in what they provide.
So how did you make the transition, or how did you know when you needed to make the transition from a home health service or staying at home to actually moving Arthur into a facility where they could provide better care? Was that your decision, or you knew that you couldn't do it anymore, or was it someone recommending to you?
Combination of things. So about a year before I actually placed him, he's currently in the memory care unit of an assisted living facility. So it's a completely locked down unit where the residents cannot come and go. They can't leave that unit just on their own. So about a year before that, his neurologist talked to me and said, okay, he's entering the later stages of the disease. It's time for you to start looking for a facility so you're not caught off guard. You have an idea of, where you want to place him. And so So to start that process, and then getting to the point where it was more challenging for me to take care of him at home. And then finally, my children drew the line in the sand and said, okay, Mom, pick the date. When are you going to make the decision? Because you can't do this any longer.
Sure.
So made the decision, picked the place, and placed
But it wasn't, obviously, isn't that easier for Arthur either, was it? I mean, did he know what was going on? Did he know this transition?
Fortunately for him, he did not know.
He did not know.
I don't have any sense that he knew any differently from where he was. He didn't complain about where he was or ask to leave. So that gave me comfort, because I always knew when it came to that time, if he didn't want to be there, that would make it even harder.
Right. But there were some times in his illness, I'm just assuming, there would be some times in the illness you had to sit down with Arthur where he was cognizant of enough to understand you can't do certain things anymore. I do not want you picking up a hammer and working on anything in the house. Or I'm taking the car keys. I mean,
that
did
was
you
the
have
biggest? Oh, absolutely. That's the biggest. Because, for everybody, driving is our sense of independence. And so that was the biggest, that he couldn't drive any longer. So, yeah.
Did he fight it? And or did he ever skip out of the house without you knowing it?
He skipped out a few times. So we always have to make sure we hid the keys. One evening, my daughter and I went out to dinner, and just before we left the restaurant, she said, I forgot I left my car keys out on the counter. And I said, so when we got home, her car was gone. And so he had this set route he liked to go, even if we took him out for rides.
Okay.
We would go this one route. So I said, I knew where it was. And then he had his phone with him. I was able to use the locator and locate the phone. And so I knew where he was. So we were able to meet him, get him to stop. And
does anything else off the top of your head come out as to some things you had to talk with? And how did you communicate with Arthur during this time? Was it more forceful? You almost had to do I don't want to say tough love, but that kind of, or was it gentle and he understood, or what?
I mean, you have to do both. And as caregivers, we have what we call therapeutic lies or fibs, where sometimes you have to tell them something that's not true, just to get them to, agree or calm down or understand something. So, yeah, some people say, oh, I can't tell a lie. Well, sometimes you have to, because it's for their own good.
Right.
So, like, one of the things, and I just made the recommendation to a friend of mine, someone initially early on told me, get power of attorney. And so I said, oh my gosh, how am I going to get him to sign a power of attorney? She said, dear, we don't have a power of attorney on each other. It's something we need to have on each other. So got it drawn up, went to get it signed. And so he signed one for me, and I signed one for him. And, I just ripped up the one, giving him power of attorney over me. But, it was something I had to do to make sure he didn't question and say, I don't want to do this, and why I got to sign over my rights, just to you.
Sure.
So, yeah, there are things that come up that are challenges.
To say the least. Yeah, absolutely. Yes. You, as a caregiver and as the spouse of someone who needs care, I think is particularly, I don't want to say a precarious thing, but it's something where you don't really want to be, because, again, when you really love and care for that person, it is hard to go through and even watch them closer, but then to be a caregiver. I'm trying to think, it's like, how are you through this process, and what do you recommend for caregivers, and what do you need as a caregiver? I guess I had so many questions I wanted to ask about that.
For any relationship, it's tough. And I've been through being a caregiver for my mom that had dementia, as well as being as a spouse. And, this is your life partner. This is the person that knows you intimately and things you share that nobody else knows. And so for me, that was more challenging than, that's really a loss.
Right.
And then with things that, you had different roles in the household, things he did, things I did. Well, now I'm doing my things, I'm doing his things, and on top of that, being a caregiver.
Right.
So, yeah, that it's difficult.
Absolutely. Were there things that people did for you that really helped, that stand out in your mind, that you would say, hey, if I had an opportunity to be with a caregiver or something like that, I should probably think more about?
So things like this can be a very isolating disease, and especially as it progresses, that you can't go out and do things with your loved one the way you used to.
Sure.
So coming engaging with the individual or the caregiver at home and, helping them out, or providing a meal, or come and sit with their loved one and give them time
Sure.
away. Because one of the most important things is self-care and knowing when it's time to take a break.
Right.
And so often, we wear our capes and the S on our chest and think we can do it all,
Right.
and think no one else can do it the way we do it, and maybe they can't. But sometimes you just got to let go of that.
Yes.
And let somebody else come in and give you a break.
Yes.
One thing I often say in the support groups I participate in is, don't block your blessings when somebody wants to help you.
Right.
And don't block theirs because they want to help. And I remember several times his niece would call me and say, and Sharon, I'll come sit with Uncle Arthur. Just tell me what day you want me to come, and I'll come a few hours. And I say, oh, no, it's okay. And I stopped and had to think, she wants to come and do this for her uncle.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let her come.
And it'll mean so much to her.
Yes.
And, down the road that she did this for you.
Yes.
Absolutely. And you have 3 wonderful kids, Natasha and Maya and AJ. But Natasha is in Montreal.
Yes.
Maya's here in town.
Yes.
AJ lived in Phoenix and Denver. So
Yes.
that was some challenges, but they all came together also for you in times when you need it. And in fact, AJ, is he living here in New Orleans still?
Pretty much most of the time he's living here.
Okay, okay.
So he helps out quite a bit.
And then Natasha comes from Montreal quite often, doesn't she?
Yes. So she spends about 6 months out of the year in Montreal and the other half here. So yeah, they all pitch in and help out. One of the biggest blessings is that we're all on the same page, discuss things as things progress, decisions we have to make about his health care. He was diagnosed with AFib, and they wanted to put in a pacemaker, and we're like, nope, we're not doing this. Recently, he was diagnosed with blockage in his legs, and they wanted to do angiograms, and the kids were like, nope, we're not doing this. So that has helped, that I don't have to deal with bickering and them second guessing the decisions. So we're pretty much on the same page with what needs to be done. Yeah,
absolutely. You said you've been married for 39 years. Yeah. And except for the illness and everything else, just knowing you and Arthur, they were great years and things. I'm sure there's a lot of things that you miss. But you had mentioned something to me at one time. It's not so much the memories or the things that you did that you're going to miss. It's the things you won't be able to do.
Yeah.
And that has to be the toughest of all.
It is tough.
Because you're still young.
Yes. So that is just, again, looking ahead and seeing, okay, you didn't get to go to our oldest daughter's wedding. You won't see grandkids, travel, things we put off doing. So yeah, that's tough. Things that the kids do that only he and I would get. Those things that he really instilled and reinforced in them. It's like, I can't go back and say, look, they're doing this.
Right.
And
yes, because it just doesn't register with him, does it?
No.
Well, that's just saying, and that's the part I'm very sorry most of all, I think, for both of you, and is that. But well, I appreciate this time. I wanted you on the show, and I wanted you one of the first ones on the show because this is such an important topic, and it deals with so many people and more all the time. And I've been talking with some people, and we wonder if environmentally, if things are what's causing all of, a lot more of this. The fact that we are aging as a society is just going to bring it off more. But in many ways, it's also genetic.
Yeah, there's some forms that are specifically, genetic. FTD has a genetic component to it. So sometimes it can be, other times it's not. But, yeah.
So is there something that we can do to watch out for, or has they said something about for your kids to make sure that are there tests or anything that
there's genetic
prevent
testing to see if you're predisposed,
right?
If you have this gene for it, but it doesn't mean that you're going to get it.
Mm-hmm.
Some people choose to get it, some don't want to know. Because if you have it and you're going to get it, there's nothing you can do to prevent it from happening at this point. These diseases are not curable. So there's medications to treat the symptoms, but the disease has to, it will end.
We had talked briefly about trying to manage through the healthcare system or the physicians, insurance, legal forms, all of that. But it is for another episode. And so I'm looking forward to the next time. We're going to have another episode, and we'll talk about all of that, because I know even with my disease, obviously different than what Arthur's going through, but there are some vast similarities, and it's frustrating. And you and I both have a medical background, or a medical healthcare background, in compliance and auditing and privacy, and it's still maddening. Yes. Absolutely. So anyway, I want to make sure that we talk about this in the next episode. And I hope you appreciate and also got something out of this particular episode. I appreciate Sharon being here to share her experiences with that. If you like this, please subscribe. And it doesn't cost anything to subscribe, but you can get future episodes and what they are, and I'll be happy to send that out to you. My email is mytalitypodcast@gmail.com. And you can refer to our website. Our website is mytalitypodcast.com, and we will have resources. I will have this episode on there. We'll have some things that will, if you want to learn more about dementia and Alzheimer's, or where to find resources, we're going to be putting that onto the screen. But more importantly, I want to hear from you. If you or a loved one, if your loved one is going through dementia or Alzheimer's, I want to hear your story, and we want to be able to pray for you. I know Sharon is a woman of great faith, as well as I am. We want to pray and think about you as you're going through this and things, because I had mentioned this on one episode. My favorite quote is from Joe Louis, and he said, "You only live once, but if you do it right, once is enough." And we want that to happen for you. So stay well, everyone, and God bless.